Thank you very much. We'll start our 6-minute rounds with Mr. Barrett. Go ahead, please, sir.
So we're here today in the context in Canada of a cost of living crisis. We have 1 in 4 Canadians saying that they're going to be using food banks this fall. We know that rent prices have doubled, mortgage prices have doubled, and the Prime Minister's media buddy, who's making a very healthy salary by any measure compared to Canadian salaries, is getting a $9 million condo for his use as a residence. I know you said that its primary purpose was as a workspace, but if it's clocking on average about 2 business functions per month, and he's sleeping there 30 times per month, it sounds like its primary purpose is as a residence. Who signed off on the decision, sir? The most senior person who signed off? Just the name, please.
Mr. Chair, the transaction was signed by the Deputy Head of Mission based on a written delegation from the Director General responsible for real property planning and stewardship.
Who is the Director General?
The Director General is part of our real property team and who was supported by the governance and the process that was reviewed.
And the DG's name is?
And the DG's name is Frank Uzimbe.
And the deputy head of, and it was the deputy head of mission who had the delegated authority, and who's the deputy head of mission at the time?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to clarify that the mission actually are not part of the approval process or the decision making. The mission, the DHOM, was actually had the authority from headquarters, the DG, who had the authority to sign that transaction, which is understandable.
The name, sir?
Rob McCubbin.
Perfect.
Yeah.
In 2018, the Office of the Consul General and the Embassy to the United Nations moved into a joint workspace, which primary purpose is work, near Grand Central Station in New York City. So that facility has an executive dining room, if I understand correctly, and a reception space for up to 150 people. Is that correct? Just a yes or no, because I have a substantive question.
Mr. Chair, yes, the environment has an area that can accommodate. Unfortunately, it doesn't have the full kitchen that would be required, which would drive us to actually have quite expensive costs for actually providing the food by a caterer.
Okay, so does Mr. Clark prepare the food himself at his apartment, or is there a caterer or a hired chef that does that?
Mr. Chair, I'd be pleased to answer that question. I'll turn very quickly to the DG.
I think we know the answer is that there are third-party costs associated with the food preparation, irrespective of where it happens. My substantive question is, why is the executive space that was purpose-built in 2018 for use by the Consul General and use by Canada's ambassador to the United Nations not sufficient, and that we had to incur millions of dollars of extra expenses that are going to be financed through the taxes of Canadians who are struggling to survive in the form of a $9 million penthouse on Billionaires Row in New York City for Justin Trudeau's media buddy? Why couldn't we use the space that was purpose-built instead of getting this luxurious location that's primary purpose is just for Mr. Clark's lodgings?
Mr. Chair, welcome this question where we can actually articulate the space requirement that we provide and the reason behind it. I'll turn very quickly to the ADM of real property that can articulate the need that are actually identified as we provide this kind of like space. So I'll turn to Mr. Robin Dubois that can articulate more details about it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As in opening remarks, we said the official residence is served as a place of living, but also as a platform for representation. We do have representation space at the consulate that is now amalgamated with the mission to the United Nations. We did that in 2018 to create savings and synergies. There is representational space in the office, but it doesn't allow for the kind of activities and representation that the official residence would. The new official residence has been acquired. It is smaller. It can accommodate smaller.
Thanks very much. We heard all of that information already. That was it took you a minute to not offer us any new information. We had previous representatives in the space. I think now Senator Pamela Wallin occupied the previous residence, identified it as sufficient. The $1.8 million estimate for renovations of the old residence suddenly became insufficient in 2023, which was right around the time that that Mr. Clark was the new head of mission, or the new consul general there. What happened that got the ball rolling there? Was it Mr. Clark that initiated the request? And if it was not Mr. Clark, who was it?
Mr. Chair, I welcome this question. I'd like to start by saying that there was no influence from Mr. Clark. He was not involved in the consultation or decision process.
Okay. So would you be able to table all correspondence on the subject of the new residence, or the transition to a discussion on a new residence instead of renovations?
Mr. Chair, as explained, we have a governance that's actually managed by headquarters, and we'd be pleased to actually table what the whole process is and how we got to
The correspondence, sir. You'll table the correspondence?
Mr. Chair, I can look at what's available and get back to you on that.
Well, if there was correspondence, you'll table it?
Yeah, I'll look into
Perfect.
it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry. Thanks, Mr. Barrett. We'll go to you, Mr. Shawari, please, for 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to the officials. This is the time we were looking for since yesterday, when 99% of our questions were referred to you. So welcome. I'm going to really frame my line of questioning over the next 3 hours around 3 different themes. Number 1 is going to be really the imperative for the move, and why did the move have to take place. The theme number 2 I'm going to try to get a clearer understanding is around whether all the policies and procedures were followed and whether we really got value for our money. And the last theme I'm going to focus on is around really the importance of the mission. You touched on all those 3, but I'm going to try to break it down for Canadians like me who, are Tim Horton double users. So let's start with the imperative first. My understanding is that aside from the cost imperative and looking at some of the needs, there were some new regulations were introduced by the board of the now previous property that restricted the ability of the mission to be able to perform the duties that they need to provide for us to make sure that we manage over $200 billion of trade in one of the most important cities, as you said it, which covers a lot. So can you talk about the imperative from the point of view that, aside from the cost, really we're dealt a hand that we had to react? Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This allows us to actually articulate how much of a smart investment this was, and how the process was sound following all the policy that and well documented as well. What I'll do is I'll turn to Robin that can articulate what were the main reason why we had to move and what had evolved in the last couple of years. Robin.
Thank you very much. It's a very good question. The imperative to move was based on several elements. The business case includes, as you mentioned, some restrictions that have been applied by the co-op board on the usage of the official residence. There was one element that was part of the decision. There was also the fact that the unit was aging, and we had received report in 2017 that in the early 2020s there would be a need to refurbish or renovate the apartment, and that's the $2.6 million cost that was reported. And there was also another element that that was reported in the business case, that was since the introduction of the Accessible Canada Act in 2021, the apartment was not compliant with that act. So all of those elements led to option analysis. And what we do in our investment management framework, we make sure that we look at the full life cycle analysis of all of the options. So in 2023, what happened is we launched these initiatives to look at what are the three options that are available to us and what would be the cost benefit of each of the three. The three elements would be renovate, put $2.6 million to renovate the actual unit, or replace it with a leased asset, or replace it with a Crown owned asset. And we really, when it all came down to cost at the end of the day, because we had the last option that was replaced to own was more beneficial, of course, in the long term. So the net present value was calculated on the three options, and we picked the third one, which became the favorite option because it was creating $7.4 million of savings over, putting $2.6 million in a renovation for a unit that was still not meeting all of our requirements.
So thank you. So that really covers the imperative from three different angles. The restriction that was put to the operation by the cooperative board, which plays an important role. Even if we refurbished by $2.8 million, we still had to rely on other venues to be able to execute some of the activities that we do. And also, it looks like based on what I'm hearing, is that the due diligence was done. Now, let's go back and talk about the importance of the mission. So why one of our colleagues yesterday suggested, why don't we move to New Jersey? Let me ask that question. Why wouldn't we move it to New Jersey?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. There's nobody better placed to actually answer that question than my colleague, DG of North America, to talk about the operation, so I will actually turn to him.
Thank you. So I think that all of the honorable members would appreciate the importance of the United States. There's no country in the world that is more important to Canada's economic and security interests. And within that country, New York is the economic center. It's also a global economic center for global capital markets, right? And so the committee will have heard the Assistant Comptroller of Canada yesterday say that all real property needs to serve a program need. In the case of the Global Affairs portfolio, those program needs include the Trade and Investment Program, the Public Affairs Program, and the program providing consular services to Canadians.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Allen, that is our time. We'll go to Mrs. Vignola, please.
Merci. Merci beaucoup. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today. Now, you talked about savings of $7.4 million. Is that in Canadian or American dollars?
Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais clarifier effectivement.
I'd like to clarify, Mr. Chair, that we're speaking of Canadian dollars here. Thank you. And over what span of time will that sum of money be saved? Is that per year? Or is it over the apartment's life cycle? Thank you for the question. That will enable us to clarify the net present value. There's the sale price of the current residence versus the purchase price of the new property. Then there's the cost of renovations that we will not be doing that is included in that sum. Then there are also the annual costs that will be saved. I mentioned the $115,000 in my opening remarks. That will be annual. Annual operational costs will be cut in half. If I understand correctly, the current residence, the one that is currently on the market, the HOA costs are approximately $13,000 does that include municipal taxes or not? And this I'm asking in US dollars. Thank you for the question. I'm going to ask Robin for the answer, just to ensure we really are giving you the right numbers. That's a good question. I'd like to add to what my colleague Stéphane was saying. When we calculate the value, we are looking partly at the difference between the sales price and the purchase price, because we know that the difference is $3.9 million, and we're also considering future savings. Current practice, usual practice rather, is to take the savings over the next 20 years. I don't have the exact details right now, but the overall monthly costs, well, they're currently about $10,000 a year, $120,000 a year. The previous cost was higher, and that's where we came up with the calculation that we're giving you. So the $7.4 million sum contains some current amounts, but also some amounts from the next 20 years. And so over the next 20 years, is there a projection for the maintenance fees for this new property, maintenance costs? Because we know that lots of things don't last that long. So is there a projection for the maintenance costs for this property over that 20-year period? Is there a plan for that? Is this cost for possible maintenance and renovation included in the 20-year spending projections? Yes. Mr. Chair, I will answer the question, and then I will ask Robin to add. Now, we do have a rather complex plan, but I will ask Robin to give you more details specifically.
It's a good question, and it's yes, we take into account the a percentage for recapitalization. Oh, excusez, je vais passer au français. On prend un coût.
So yes, a percentage cost for asset recapitalization, and that's been included in the calculations. So in the net annual value of this project, we take the 4% industry standard for recapitalization of the asset during its life cycle. Thank you very much. I will now turn to Mr. McCubbing, the Deputy Consul General. I'm sorry, I'm struggling a little bit due to my advanced years to see the exact spelling of his name. Now, you are the new Deputy Consul General in New York?
Mr. Chair, yes, I'm the Deputy Consul General in New York.
Et vous avez rencontré le nouveau consul?
You met with the new Consul General?
Yes, I work with the Consul General.
J'aimerais simplement avoir une...
Yes, now, I'm not familiar with everyone's bio, so I have a question. Regarding the Consul General, Mr. Clark, are we speaking of the journalist who was chosen to moderate the leaders' debate for the last Conservative Party leadership race?
Mr. Chair, Consul General Clark is a former broadcaster. I'm not 100% familiar with his complete work history, so I'm not sure if he moderated the previous Conservative debate.
Yeah, that is our time, I'm afraid. Mr. Bachrach, good morning. Good early morning to you. Over to you, sir, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And before I start, I'd just like to ask the clerk if my sound is okay. I understand there were some issues during the sound test, and I never had a chance to come back and confirm.
Yeah, we seem to be fine, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much to our witnesses. And as was remarked earlier, it's great to have folks from Global Affairs here who were more intimately involved in the acquisition we're discussing than some of our witnesses yesterday. And I wanted to start perhaps at a high level and talking a little bit about why this issue has come before the committee. And I think part of it is that the properties that are selected for consular use in cities like New York tend to be expensive properties. They tend to be in expensive parts of town. And the opulence and the ostentatiousness of those properties makes them, rightfully, I think, a target for questions about the appropriateness of those purchases. And at the same time, I think we all want to ensure that our consular staff and our diplomats have appropriate facilities for their important work. The apartment that we're talking about is located in a neighborhood that's known as Billionaires Row. And we're having this conversation at a time of historic wealth inequality and an affordability crisis that my colleagues have already mentioned. And I think that's one of the reasons that we're focusing in on this particular decision, because Global Affairs chose to buy an apartment on Billionaires Row in a neighborhood that has some of the most expensive real estate in the world. So my first question, probably to Mr. Cousineau, is whether in the decision-making process, the optics and the potential implications of buying a property on Billionaires Row at a time of historic wealth inequality, both in the United States and Canada, came up as a potential risk factor for Global Affairs.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. First, I'd like to say that we are looking at the heritage building that is in the Midtown district. As I said in my opening remark, this heritage building is an old building that was recently renovated. We are not in the skyscraper, which might have led to the branding that's being reported in the media. We're not in that building. Also, I'd like to reiterate that we have a process that actually looks at specific criteria to respond to the diplomatic needs, which are around location, security, and other criteria. I'd be pleased to turn to my colleague Robin, responsible for real property, who could articulate how we got to that decision of the 111 57th Street.
Thank you, Stefan. Thanks for the question. What I will offer to the committee is that we have a set of guidelines and a real property manual that exists that has a chapter on how to select official residences. And that lays out basically what are the characteristics that we're looking and also what kind of location that we would like to acquire. We pick that residence there. And as I said in my previous intervention, it's a place of work when we hold meetings, and it's also a place where the Consul General will live. So we have two sets of criteria that we need to apply here. It's criteria for a good location to be able to deliver the program that we have, the program being the representation functions that we need to exercise abroad. So we basically locate the official residences in location where contacts are accessible, where other like-minded countries are located, nearby our office as well for various reasons. And we have a set of criteria for the selection of the official residence for the living space. In this particular case, what happened is we looked with the real estate broker at 21 properties that are located in 7
If
different...
I could interrupt you, sir.
Yes,
the original question, sometimes the original question gets lost a little bit in the explanation. The original question was whether the optics and the perception that might be associated with purchasing a property in an area colloquially known as Billionaires Row was ever discussed as a risk factor by Global Affairs during the purchase decision.
Thanks for the question, Mr. Chair. During the process, we applied all of the factors and basically found that place around in the 7 neighborhood that we visited, and saw that it was considerably cheaper or less expensive to be located in Midtown, which is the location where we purchased. And the question of Billionaire Row did not surface at that time because we were looking at the characteristic, location, and functionality of the property.
Okay, I appreciate that. Now, here in Canada, certainly my colleagues and myself are working very hard to implement policies that promote equality, that create opportunity for working people, that create solid social programs that lift people up, and address some of the gross inequalities that we see in places like the United States and certainly to some degree in our own country. Now, was it ever discussed by Global Affairs that purchasing a consular property in a neighborhood that was a little less ostentatious might be more consistent with some of those goals that we've been pursuing as a country over the past number of years?
I'm going to interrupt there. We're out of time, but perhaps we can get back to that in the next round, or perhaps you can provide that to us in writing.